My name is Mariana Ridgewell. I'm 32 years old. And before I tell you what happened that week, before I tell you about the locked door, the pounding fists, and the way my own mother looked at me like I was a thief in my own home, you need to understand something. There is a special kind of humiliation that doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who raised you. It started with a phone call. But the truth is, it really started long before that. I grew up in Riverside, California, in a comfortable ranch-style home tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood where lawns were always trimmed and everyone smiled like nothing bad ever happened behind closed doors. My parents, Ronald and Patricia, looked like the kind of couple neighbors pointed to and said, "They raised such a good family." And for a long time, I believed that. I believed family meant unconditional love. I believed if I worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, forgave enough, eventually I would earn my place. Then I grew up, and I realized something that still tastes bitter in my mouth when I say it out loud. My brother Dylan was their favorite. Not subtly, not accidentally, blatantly. Dylan is 4 years younger than me, and in my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong, even when he was doing everything wrong. When I graduated from Stanford with honors and landed a position at a promising tech startup in San Francisco, they sent me a generic congratulations text. No call, no pride in their voices, no dinner, no photos framed on the mantle. Just, "Congrats, proud of you." But when Dylan barely dragged himself across the finish line at community college with D's and C's, they threw him a graduation party that cost thousands of dollars. Balloons, a rented venue, a cake with his name written in glittering frosting, like he'd cured cancer instead of barely passing Intro to Sociology. I remember standing in the corner of that party with a plastic cup of punch, watching my mother beam at him like he was a miracle. And I remember thinking, what am I then? When I saved for 2 years to buy my first car, a used Honda Accord, I was proud. I was 22, living on ramen and ambition, and I did it without asking anyone for a dime. And my parents didn't congratulate me. They criticized the color, the mileage, the financing terms. They made it feel like I'd made a mistake by trying. But when Dylan totaled his third car while drunk driving, causing a 4-car pileup on the 405, my father bought him a brand new Ford F-150 the following week, a truck that cost more than my entire annual rent at the time. That was the first time I said it out loud. "Why do you always have to make everything about you, Mariana?" my mother snapped, her voice sharp like a slap. "Your brother needs more support. You're resilient enough on your own." Resilient. That became the word they used like a leash. A compliment that wasn't a compliment. A way to justify neglect. And I believed it for years. I believed if I achieved enough, they would finally see me as worthy. So I pushed myself harder. I worked 70-hour weeks. I climbed the corporate ladder like my life depended on it, while Dylan bounced between restaurant jobs, retail position, and long stretches of unemployment, always finding someone else to blame. The manager was unfair. The schedule was impossible. The customers were rude. The world was against him. And my parents nodded along like his excuses were gospel. Then came the calls. They always came when I was finally sitting down, finally breathing, finally letting myself forget them for a few hours. "Can you help your brother with his rent again?" my father asked one Thursday evening in October, like he was asking me to pick up milk. "He's between opportunities." "Dad, this is the 5th time this year," I said, my jaw tight. Maybe if he actually kept a job? "Don't start with that negative attitude," he cut in, voice hardening. "Family helps family, Mariana." So I sent the money. Again. Because that's what I did. Because I was trained to. Because every time I tried to say no, my mother cried. My father got cold. Dylan got cruel. And somehow I was always the selfish one. By my own careful calculation, I had given Dylan over $35,000 in loans that were never repaid. Meanwhile, I lived in a cramped studio apartment in Oakland, saving every possible penny for something bigger. Something that would finally feel like mine. My entire life trajectory changed when my company, a fintech startup called Payream, went public. Overnight, my stock options became worth more money than I ever imagined I would see in my lifetime. My coworkers celebrated with Teslas and luxury trips to Bali. I did something different. I invested most of it quietly, index funds, long-term stability, and I bought a beautiful piece of land in the Napa Valley Hills because I had always dreamed of building my own home. Not just a house, a sanctuary. A contemporary villa with clean architectural lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough space to breathe without feeling suffocated by city noise or family expectations. When I told my mother over Sunday brunch, her voice dripped with skepticism. "You're building a house?" she said, eyebrows raised like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. Isn't that a bit overly ambitious for someone your age? I've saved and planned for this, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The company's success means I can finally. Must be nice, Dylan interrupted, aggressively cutting into his pancakes like the knife was the only power he had. Some of us actually have to work for a living instead of getting lucky. I stared at him. I work 75 hours a week, Dylan. Yeah, he sneered, typing on computers. Real back-breaking labor. And my father, my own father, laughed. Actually laughed. Like Dylan mocking my work was comedy. He's got a point, Princess, Ronald said, smirking. Don't let that tech money go to your head. Pride comes before a fall. Something went cold in me. I had brought architectural renderings that day, pages I'd spent weeks perfecting with my architect, excited to show them, hoping, stupidly hoping, they'd be proud. They didn't even ask to see them. I left early, their dismissive words echoing in my head like a broken record. Construction took 9 months. 9 months of weekly site visits, contractor meetings, material selections, and thousands of careful decisions. I poured my heart into every detail. Reclaimed wood floors, solar panels, smart home technology that controlled everything from temperature to security. Every choice felt like a stitch closing a wound I'd carried my whole life. I didn't tell my family about the progress. They'd made their disinterest painfully clear, and sometimes around Riverside I'd run into family friends. How's that house project coming along? They'd ask, genuinely curious. I'd smile politely and give vague answers, not knowing my parents were telling an entirely different story behind my back. Later, I learned my mother had been telling her garden club friends, "Oh yes, Mariana's little project. We're guiding her through the whole process. She has absolutely no experience with these construction things. Ronald's been personally advising her on contractors and inspectors." They were taking credit for my dream, for my work, for the life they never supported. And those lies, those elaborate, polished lies, would later become their downfall. But I didn't know that yet. The villa was completed in early December, just in time for the holidays. It was everything I had envisioned, and more. A sleek, modern sanctuary with panoramic windows overlooking the valley. A chef's kitchen with Thermador appliances. 5 bedrooms, each with an ensuite bathroom. An infinity pool that looked like it spilled straight into the horizon. The first night I slept there, I sat on the wraparound terrace with a glass of Napa Cabernet, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and purple. For the first time in my life, I felt safe, like I had built something no one could take from me. And that's when I made my mistake. Hope. I called my mother during our weekly phone call, my voice lighter than it had been in years. "So, Christmas at my place this year?" I asked, genuinely excited. "I have all this space now. I could host everyone comfortably." There was a pause on the line. Then Patricia sighed, like I'd asked her to move the ocean. "Oh, honey, no," she said. "We're doing Christmas at home as always. Same traditions, same menu, same everything. You know how your father is about change." "But Mom," I tried again, "I could make it special. New traditions. We could—" "Mariana, stop being difficult," she snapped, that familiar irritation sliding into place. "Christmas is at home. Period. End of discussion." I swallowed the disappointment like broken glass. "Okay," I said quietly. "What time should I arrive Christmas Eve?" Another pause. Longer this time. Uncomfortable. And then she said, softly, too softly, like she was about to hand me a knife and call it a gift, "Actually, sweetie, we need to have a serious conversation about that." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Well," Patricia hesitated, and I could hear the performance forming in her throat. "Dylan is going through an extremely rough time right now. His girlfriend, Amber, left him quite suddenly, and he's emotionally fragile." I blinked. "Okay, and?" "He specifically said that you make him feel inadequate," she continued, "with all your constant success talk." Success talk. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. "Mom, I barely mention work around him anymore because it always causes problems." "You don't have to say anything explicitly," she said, voice sharpening. "It's your whole attitude, Mariana. The designer clothes, that new Lexus, now this extravagant house. It's just too much for him to handle right now." My fingers curled around my phone so tightly it hurt. "So what exactly are you saying?" My voice went dangerously quiet. There was a beat, and then my mother said it. "I think it's best if you sit this Christmas out," she said. "Just this year. Just until Dylan is feeling more stable emotionally." I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. My own mother was disinviting me from Christmas because my hard-earned success made my perpetually unemployed brother uncomfortable. "Mariana, don't be overly dramatic," she added quickly, like she could smooth it over. "It's just 1 year, right? 1 single year." 1 year, I repeated numbly. Then I hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in the middle of my beautiful new kitchen, my dream kitchen, surrounded by silence so loud it felt like pressure on my chest. I had built this house partly because I thought, maybe, if I created the perfect space, my family would finally come together. Maybe it would bridge the distance. Instead, it became another wedge, another excuse, another weapon. My boyfriend, Ethan Caldwell, found me sitting on the floor, back against the cabinet, staring at nothing. He knelt beside me, gentle hands on my shoulders. "Mariana," he murmured, "talk to me." And when I finally looked up at him, I saw something in his expression that scared me almost as much as my mother's words. Not pity, not shock, recognition. Like he'd been waiting for this moment because he knew it was always coming. And somewhere in the back of my mind, another Travoga flickered. Quiet, sharp, unwanted. Because earlier that day, Ethan's phone had buzzed with a message that made his jaw tighten. A name I hadn't heard in months. Amber Hale, his ex-girlfriend. And the way the storm was gathering in my life, I could feel it. 2 storms. One from my blood. One from the shadows around the man I loved. And I didn't know yet which one would hit first. The first thing I did after my mother disinvited me from Christmas was nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't call back. I didn't send a paragraph-long text begging her to explain, the way I used to when I was younger, when I still believed that if I found the right words, I could unlock love. I just sat there, on the cold kitchen floor, in the house I'd built as proof I mattered, and listened to the silence. It was Ethan who finally pulled me back into my body. He slid down next to me, his back against the cabinet, close enough that our shoulders touched. He didn't push me to talk. He didn't feed me comfort cliches. He just stayed. After a while, he said quietly, "They didn't deserve that question." "What question?" My voice came out cracked. "What time should I arrive?" He looked at me. "They've trained you to ask permission to exist." That sentence landed like a slap. Because it was true. I swallowed hard, then forced myself to stand. My knees felt weak, but something else, something old and tired, was starting to harden in my chest. I walked through my villa like I was seeing it for the first time. The clean architectural lines, the glowing floor-to-ceiling windows, the empty guest rooms. I'd imagined my parents' laughter here. Dylan pretending to be impressed, my mother bragging to her friends that her daughter had made it. And then I remembered how Patricia's voice had gone sharp when she said, "Stop being difficult," as if my existence was an inconvenience. Ethan watched me for a long moment, then said, "So, what do you want to do?" I almost said nothing, hide, sleep until January, but instead something raw rose up. I started, then stopped, because I didn't know if I was allowed to want things. And then I heard my best friend Veronica's voice in my head, her no-nonsense lawyer tone that never made room for manipulation. "Choose yourself." So I said it. "I want Christmas here," I told Ethan, "in my home, with people who actually want me there." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then we do that," he said simply. And that was the moment the villa stopped being a dream that needed my parents' approval, and became mine. Over the next 2 days, my grief transformed into something else. Energy. A restless, determined kind of energy that felt almost manic, not because I was happy, but because if I stopped moving, I might collapse. I hired an interior decorator to help make the place feel warm without losing the clean, modern aesthetic I loved. A 12-foot Fraser fir went up in the great room, its branches heavy and perfect, like something from a magazine spread. White lights traced the exterior architecture like glowing veins. Garlands wrapped the staircase railing, softening the sharp lines of the steel and glass. I bought candles that smelled like pine and orange peel and cinnamon, scents that felt like a promise. And then I started setting up the guest rooms. Not for my parents, not for Dylan, for my chosen family. Veronica, who'd been disowned for refusing to join her father's corporate law firm. Sophia, an ER nurse with scars she didn't talk about much, left behind by controlling parents who called their control love. Brandon, a high school teacher whose family had made it clear he was only welcome if he lived a life that fit their definition of normal. They didn't love me conditionally. They didn't measure my worth by how useful I was. They just loved me, and that should not have felt revolutionary. But it did. On the 3rd day, while I was in the kitchen reviewing my grocery delivery list, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. I stared at the screen until it felt like the phone was a live thing in my hand. Finally, I opened the messages. "Heard about your fancy new place. Must be nice to abandon family during the holidays. Cousin Jennifer." My stomach turned. Then another message came through. "I can't believe you're being so selfish during Christmas. Your poor mother is devastated. Aunt Helen." Then, Your mother is absolutely heartbroken that you refused to come to Christmas. What kind of daughter are you? Uncle Kenneth. My hands went cold, because I understood immediately what had happened. They had spun it. They had taken my humiliation, my disinvitation, and rewritten it into a story where I was the villain. Of course they had. It was almost impressive, in a sick way, how quickly they could rewrite reality to keep themselves clean. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because I could already hear how they would twist them. If I defended myself, I'd be dramatic. If I explained, I'd be making excuses. If I begged, they'd call it proof that I was unstable. So I did what felt impossible. I stayed silent. I kept decorating. I kept preparing. I kept building a Christmas that didn't require my parents' approval. But the texts didn't stop. They multiplied. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly found my number like a flock of vultures circling fresh roadkill. Each message carried the same smell, judgment disguised as concern. And behind it, I could feel Patricia's voice guiding them. That's what she did. She recruited other people's morality to punish me, so she could keep her hands clean. Ethan came into the kitchen that night and found me staring at the screen, jaw clenched, so tight it hurt. "What is it?" he asked. I handed him the phone. He read the messages, his face tightening with each one. "Jesus," he muttered. Then he looked at me, and his voice dropped. "They're trying to isolate you." "I know," I said quietly. And then, because I couldn't stop myself, I added, "It's working." Ethan crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped his arms around me. "It's not," he said firmly, like he was correcting a lie, "because you're not alone." I let myself breathe into his chest for a moment. Then his phone buzzed. I felt his body stiffen instantly. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second, but I felt it. Because when you've grown up learning to anticipate emotional danger, you notice the smallest shifts. Ethan pulled his phone out, glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened the way it had earlier that week. He didn't say anything, but I saw the name reflected faintly in the glass of the window behind him. Amber, his ex-girlfriend. My throat went dry. Ethan turned the phone face down on the counter like it had burned him. "What did she want?" I asked carefully. He hesitated, and that hesitation, small, human, innocent, hit me harder than it should have. Because my entire life, hesitation was where secrets lived. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was too controlled. "Just her being her." "What does that mean?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She heard from someone that your parents are devastated." He made air quotes, irritation flashing. "She said she hopes you're not isolating me from my family the way you're doing to yours." My vision narrowed. The cruelty of it wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how fast she had picked up my mother's weapon and swung it. I stared at Ethan, my voice low. "So she's already talking about my family situation." "She's always been opportunistic," Ethan admitted. I swallowed. Because Amber wasn't just Dylan's ex-girlfriend. She was also now Ethan's ex. And suddenly the word Amber felt like a thread connecting 2 different fires in my life. Dylan's heartbreak, Ethan's past, my mother's manipulation. And I didn't like the way those threads were pulling tighter. Ethan reached for my hand. "Mariana," he said gently, "Amber Hale is not your mother. She doesn't get to define your story." I held his gaze, then nodded slowly. "I'm not letting anyone define it anymore," I said. And I meant it. That night, I texted Veronica. "Christmas Eve, my place. Please come early. I need you." She replied in under a minute. "I'm there. And Mariana, don't you dare apologize for needing support." The next day, Sophia confirmed she'd come right after her hospital shift. Brandon said he'd bring dessert and extra folding chairs. And as each message came in, a warmth started returning to my chest. Not the warmth of approval, but the warmth of belonging. Still, the texts from relatives kept buzzing. And then the weather shifted. On December 22nd, a cold snap hit Northern California so hard, the local news anchors looked genuinely concerned. They warned people to stay inside. Roads were slick. Temperatures plunged fast after sunset. The kind of cold that makes you feel like the world is sharpening its knives. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway upstairs, smoothing fresh sheets over the guest bed in the room I'd set aside for Veronica. I tried to focus on the small things, the texture of the fabric, the scent of clean linen, the gentle hum of the smart thermostat doing its job. But my mind kept replaying Patricia's voice. Just 1 year, just until Dylan is stable. As if Dylan's comfort was the sun, and I was just a planet that was supposed to orbit him. I was fluffing the last pillow when the doorbell chimed. A crisp, musical sound that echoed through the house. My body went still. Ethan called from downstairs. "You expecting someone?" "No," I said, my voice automatically quiet. I walked to the top of the stairs, looking down into the open space of the great room. The Christmas tree lights twinkled. The house looked calm. Peaceful. Too peaceful. The doorbell chimed again. My skin prickled. I moved to the wall panel that controlled the security system, tapped the camera feed, and my stomach dropped so fast it felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. A silver Cadillac sat in my circular driveway, packed so full of luggage and boxes it looked like someone was moving in. And standing beside it, smiling like they were arriving at a resort, were my parents. Ronald, Patricia, and Dylan. My breath caught. Ethan came up behind me and looked at the screen. Mariana, he murmured. Patricia waved at the door camera. Actually waved, like she owned the place. And Dylan was holding shopping bags full of wrapped gifts, like a man who'd never once paid for anything he carried. My mother leaned toward the intercom, her mouth forming a word I couldn't hear through the glass. But I could guess it. Surprise. My fingers hovered over the button to speak. My whole body was shaking, not from fear exactly, from the sheer audacity, from the way the past was trying to force its way into my present. Ethan's hand tightened on my shoulder. What do you want to do? He asked quietly. I stared at the screen, watching Patricia smile, watching Ronald stand with that familiar posture of authority, watching Dylan smirk. And something inside me whispered a warning. This wasn't a visit. This was an invasion. I inhaled slowly. Then I turned towards the stairs. I'm going to open the door, I said. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Mariana! I'm going to open it, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. But I'm not letting them in. I started walking down, and with every step, the villa felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a battleground. I opened the front door just enough for cold air to slice into the warmth of my home. Patricia stood there in a wool coat I recognized immediately, the one she wore to impress people. Her smile was stretched too wide, rehearsed, like a mask she'd perfected over decades. Ronald was already moving forward, one hand wrapped around the handle of a massive suitcase, eyes scanning the foyer as if he were inspecting a hotel lobby. And Dylan leaned against the railing with his arms crossed, smirk firmly in place, like this was all just another show and he'd bought front row seats. Surprise, my mother chirped, clapping her hands once. We decided to take you up on your offer to host Christmas after all. I didn't move. I didn't smile. What offer? I asked flatly. You explicitly disinvited me from Christmas, remember? Ronald didn't even look at me. He pushed the door wider with his shoulder, wheels of the suitcase bumping over the threshold. Don't be petty and childish, Mariana, he said, already halfway inside. We're here now. Let's make the best of it. Dylan snorted softly behind them. Nice place, sis, he said, eyes flicking up to the ceiling like he was calculating square footage. About time you shared some of that tech money. Something inside me snapped into focus. I stepped forward and planted myself squarely in the doorway. No, I said, stop, right now. Ronald stopped short, clearly shocked I'd blocked him. You absolutely cannot just show up here unannounced after telling me I wasn't welcome at your Christmas, I said, my voice tight but controlled. My mother's expression shifted instantly, from cheerful to concerned, like she'd flipped a switch. Honey, she said softly, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. There was clearly a misunderstanding. We never said you couldn't come to Christmas. We just gently suggested you might be more comfortable here, with all your beautiful new space. The gaslighting was almost impressive. That is not what happened, I said. And you know it. Ronald straightened, his tone sliding into the authoritative voice I remembered from childhood punishments. Look, he said, your mother worked incredibly hard planning this trip. The least you can do is be gracious and welcoming. Planning what trip? I shot back. This is my house, my home. You weren't invited. Dylan's smirk widened. Wow, he said. So much for family spirit. I told them you'd be exactly like this, selfish and bitter. That was it. Years of swallowing my words. Years of paying his bills. Years of being told I was too much and not enough at the same time. They all crashed together in my chest. You know what? I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with fury. Absolutely not. You don't get to do this to me. Patricia's face hardened instantly. Excuse me? She said, the warmth vanishing, like it had never existed. You disinvited me from Christmas, I continued, every word sharp and deliberate. Specifically because my success makes Dylan uncomfortable. You've spent my entire life making me feel like I'm never enough while constantly babying him. And now you want to use my home like some kind of free luxury hotel. Ronald stepped closer, his face darkening. How dare you speak to us like that, he growled. We're your parents. Parents who only see my value when it benefits you, I shot back. Where was this interest in my house when I was building it? Where was the pride when I shared my plans? Where were you then? You're being ridiculous, Patricia snapped. We're family. Family shares everything. I laughed once, short and bitter. Funny how sharing only ever goes one way, I said. When did Dylan last share anything? When did either of you? Dylan let out a harsh laugh. Here she goes again, he sneered, playing the eternal victim, poor successful Mariana with her villa and her perfect life. A life I built myself, I said, my voice steady now. While you sat on Mom and Dad's couch complaining about how unfair the world is. Enough, Ronald bellowed. You will let us inside right now. Or what? I challenged, not stepping back. You'll cut me off? Stop talking to me? You already did that when you banned me from Christmas. Patricia's face crumpled. Tears welled instantly, on cue. The same tears she'd used my entire childhood. I cannot believe you're doing this to us, she sobbed. On Christmas, Mariana, on Christmas. I felt something inside me go still. You're not welcome here, I said quietly. Get off my property. Ronald stared at me like I'd slapped him. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said. You made your choice. You chose Dylan's comfort over having me at Christmas. Now live with it. I reached for the door. Patricia lunged forward, wedging her foot in the gap. Where are we supposed to go? She demanded. We already told everyone we'd be spending the holidays at your villa, and there it was. The truth. They hadn't come for family. They'd come for the story, for the photos, for the social status, for the chance to parade my home around like it belonged to them. Suddenly, every angry text made sense. They weren't mad I'd skipped Christmas. They were furious they weren't invited to the villa they'd been bragging about. That's not my problem, I said calmly. Maybe Dylan can host everyone. Dylan scoffed. Very funny. Oh, wait, I added. He's living in your basement rent-free. Dylan surged forward, his face twisting with rage. You bitter little... Ronald grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Get off my property, I said, my voice unwavering. Right now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. Patricia's tears vanished. In their place was pure, unfiltered fury. You'll regret this, she hissed. When you're completely alone, with no family whatsoever, you'll regret this moment. I met her gaze. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who only value me as a bank account and a hotel. I closed the door, locked it, engaged every security latch. They pounded and shouted for 15 minutes. I watched from the security feed as Patricia gestured wildly, Ronald's hands clenched white around the steering wheel, Dylan pacing like a caged animal. Then they left. The silence afterward was deafening. My phone exploded within seconds. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. According to the new version of events, I'd cruelly thrown my elderly parents into the freezing cold on Christmas Eve. I blocked every single number. Without hesitation, Ethan wrapped his arms around me as my knees finally gave out. You did the right thing, he whispered. I nodded, even though my chest hurt. That night, my chosen family arrived. Veronica, sharp-eyed and steady. Sophia, exhausted but smiling. Brandon, arms full of desserts and laughter. We hugged like survivors. To choosing ourselves, Veronica toasted. To real family, I said. And for the first time in my life, Christmas felt safe. Christmas morning in my villa didn't begin with tension. It began with coffee brewing in the chef's kitchen, soft jazz humming through the speakers, and the sound of Brandon laughing too loudly at something Veronica said while she stole bacon straight from the pan. No one flinched when a door closed. No one walked on eggshells. No one monitored their tone to avoid triggering someone else's insecurity. It was peaceful, and that peace felt almost unreal after a lifetime of emotional chaos. Sophia came down the stairs last, still in scrubs because she'd come straight from an overnight ER shift. She looked exhausted, but lighter, somehow. Smells like a place where no one weaponizes guilt, she said, dropping into a chair. Veronica raised her mug. A rare and sacred environment. We laughed. And with every laugh, something inside my chest loosened. We cooked together, not because it was expected, but because we wanted to. No one criticized how much butter went into the mashed potatoes. No one complained the turkey wasn't done their way. No one made passive-aggressive comments about effort, money, or sacrifice. We talked about everything and nothing. About work, about old scars, about the families we'd stepped away from, and the ones we were still grieving. At one point, Ethan caught my eye from across the room. He didn't say anything. He just smiled. And that smile said, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Meanwhile, elsewhere, my biological family was very busy without me. I didn't know the details at first. I only knew that my phone stayed suspiciously quiet after I blocked everyone. No new numbers. No sudden apologies. Just silence. And I should have known that silence meant something was brewing. Because people who build their lives on manipulation don't suddenly learn restraint. They implode. The first crack came 2 days later. Uncle Kenneth, the same uncle who'd texted me calling me heartless for abandoning family, apparently spent Christmas dinner bragging loudly about his under-the-table construction business. He'd had a few too many drinks, and an audience. And within a week, the IRS came knocking. I didn't report him. Someone else did. Probably someone who was tired of his hypocrisy. Then there was Cousin Jennifer, the one who'd accused me of choosing a fancy house over my mother. She discovered her husband had been secretly sending money to Dylan. Large amounts. Supposed investments. Crypto schemes. Guaranteed returns. By the time she found out, they were $70,000 in debt. Their marriage didn't survive the revelation, but the real collapse, the one that sent shockwaves through my parents' carefully curated world, came from my father. Ronald had been telling everyone at his country club about his wildly successful daughter in tech. He'd spoken with pride, too much pride. He implied, strongly, that he'd been an early investor, an advisor, a guiding hand behind my success. One of his golf partners, impressed by the story, asked for an introduction. He wanted to invest. Ronald couldn't deliver. He stalled. He dodged. And when pressed, his story unraveled. Quickly. Word spread fast in a place built on reputation. By the end of the month, everyone knew the truth. Ronald Ridgewell had been taking credit for his daughter's success, while simultaneously treating her like an inconvenience. His standing collapsed almost overnight. And Patricia? Her garden club was even less forgiving. Suburban gossip is ruthless when it smells blood. The Christmas villa incident circulated with added details and sharpened edges. Patricia stopped receiving invitations. Luncheons quietly moved to other hosts. Committees filled without her. She didn't understand it. She told herself people were jealous. But the truth was simpler. They no longer respected her. And then there was Dylan. Years of enablement had taught him one thing. Other people should pay for his failures. So when my parents' social capital began drying up, he tried something bigger, bolder, stupider. He convinced several family friends to invest in his next guaranteed success. A dropshipping business selling weight loss supplements imported from China. He promised 300% returns in 6 months. He showed spreadsheets, testimonials, charts, all fake. He even rented temporary warehouse space to make it look legitimate. Paid for with investor money, of course. It collapsed within weeks. Investors were furious. Complaints were filed. Authorities started asking questions. Dylan tried to blame a non-existent business partner. Except there was no partner. He'd invented one to have someone to blame. By February, my parents were isolated. Their social circle gone. Their son under investigation. Their basement still occupied. And then my phone rang. The number wasn't blocked. Yet. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" "Mariana," my mother said. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Defeated. We need to talk." I closed my eyes. "I'm listening." There was a pause. Then the truth spilled out in fragments. "Your father's retirement fund isn't what we thought. Dylan's legal situation is worse than we expected. We might lose the house." And then, carefully, desperately, she circled toward the real reason for the call. "We were wondering," Patricia said softly, "since you have all that extra space." "No," I said. She inhaled sharply. "You didn't even let me finish." "I don't need to," I replied. "The answer is no." "But we're family," she whispered. I felt no anger, no guilt, just clarity. "Were we family when you disinvited me from Christmas?" I asked. "Were we family when you showed up uninvited and demanded my home? Were we family when you spent years making me feel like I was never enough?" Silence. Then, "We're sorry." I exhaled slowly. "Your apologies mean nothing when they only come from desperation," I said. "You're not sorry for how you treated me. You're sorry you need me now." "How can you be so cruel?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I learned from the best, Mom." And I hung up. They tried everything after that. Showing up at my office, sending relatives as messengers, even having a lawyer send a threatening letter about filial responsibility laws. My attorney shut it down in 24 hours. Cleanly. Legally. Finally. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting them off. If I feel guilty about their downfall. I tell them the truth. They didn't fall because of me. They fell because they built their lives on favoritism, manipulation, and lies. I just stopped being their safety net. My villa is peaceful now. I host dinner parties. I mentor young women in tech. I wake up without dread. The greatest gift I ever gave myself wasn't this house. It was the moment I stopped begging for love from people determined never to give it. After I hung up on my mother, I stood very still in the middle of my kitchen. No shaking hands. No racing heart. No urge to call back and soften my words. Just Stillness. That's how I knew something had finally changed. In the past, cutting a conversation short with my parents would have sent me spiraling for days. I would replay every sentence, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I'd been cruel, if maybe, just maybe, I was the problem. This time there was none of that. Only a quiet, unfamiliar feeling. Relief. Ethan found me a few minutes later, leaning against the island, staring out at the hills beyond the glass. Was that them? He asked gently. Yes. And? They want to move in, I said plainly. They're losing the house. Dylan's situation is worse than they admitted. Ethan didn't react the way people usually do when they hear something like that. He didn't rush to play peacemaker. He didn't suggest compromise. He didn't say, but they're your parents. He just asked one question. What did you say? I looked at him. I said no. A slow smile spread across his face. Not smug, not triumphant. Proud. I'm glad, he said. And that was when I realized how different this relationship was from the ones I'd grown up in. Ethan never loved me for what I could provide. He never measured my worth by how much I endured. He loved me because I chose myself, and because I let him choose himself too. In the weeks that followed, my parents escalated. They always did. First, they showed up at my office unannounced, sitting stiffly in the lobby like wronged royalty. I didn't go down. Security escorted them out. Then came the messages delivered through relatives, people who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly resurfacing as concerned intermediaries. She's your mother. He's still your father. Blood is blood. I ignored them all. The final move was legal intimidation. A letter arrived from a lawyer citing filial responsibility laws, heavily implied but poorly understood, an attempt to scare me into compliance. I forwarded it to my attorney. 24 hours later, it was dead. No legal standing. No leverage. No chance. After that, the noise stopped. And in that silence, I started to see my life clearly, for the first time. I wasn't the villain of their story. I was the missing piece they'd built their lies around. Without me sending money. Without me absorbing blame. Without me being the resilient one. Everything they'd stacked on top of me collapsed under its own weight. My parents didn't lose their social circle because I shut a door. They lost it because people finally saw who they were without my success propping them up. Dylan didn't face consequences because I stopped helping him. He faced them because no one else was left to clean up his messes. I didn't destroy my family. I stepped out of the role that was holding together something fundamentally broken. And that choice changed everything. My villa became what it was always meant to be. Not a bargaining chip. Not a trophy. A home. On weekends, I hosted dinner parties where laughter didn't come with strings attached. I started mentoring young women in tech, women who reminded me of my younger self. Desperate for approval, convinced love had to be earned through sacrifice. I told them the truth. I wish someone had told me earlier. Success doesn't fix a family that's invested in your failure. Boundaries don't make you cruel. And choosing yourself doesn't mean you hate your family. It means you refuse to disappear for them. Ethan and I grew closer, steadier. Even his past finally lost its grip. When Amber tried one last time to stir drama, subtly, publicly, sanctimoniously, Ethan shut it down without hesitation. Clear boundaries. No performance. No negotiation. Watching him do that felt like confirmation. I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way that mattered. Sometimes people ask me if I ever feel sad about my parents. I do. Not for who they are now, but for who I kept hoping they'd become. I grieve the parents I never had. The ones who would have shown up without envy. Loved without conditions. Celebrated without resentment. But I don't regret walking away. Because peace is not something you find. It's something you protect. My name is Mariana Ridgewell, and the greatest gift I ever gave myself wasn't the villa in Napa Valley. It was the moment I stopped chasing love from people who only wanted access.